Turning the screw on Russia, new sanctions are introduced to make sure it pays the price for war. G7 allies are expected to be joined by President Zelensky as Rishi Sunak warns the UK is in it for the long term.
Russia needs to know that we're not going away. They can't just outlast us in this conflict, that we will continue to defend Ukraine.
There's a bit of trouble breaking out, I have to tell you.
Also this lunchtime, violence in the Netherlands as West Ham players are forced to defend their families against rival fans. Plus, a 95-year-old woman with dementia is tasered by police at a care home in Australia. The Smiths bassist Andy Rourke has died at the age of 59.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Lucy Watson.
Good afternoon. Rishi Sunak has issued a warning to Vladimir Putin. We are not going away. The Prime Minister is in Japan with G7 allies to introduce new sanctions on Russia to ensure it pays a price for invading Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to join world leaders at the summit in person to push for more practical support on the ground. This morning, the PM sat down with our political editor, Robert Peston, when he also talked about China, describing it as the only country with the needs and intention to reshape global order.
The setting couldn't have been more peaceful, an exquisite 400-year-old tea house and gardens in Hiroshima. But when I met the Prime Minister to discuss his talks today with the G7 leaders of rich countries, our focus was obviously on war and turmoil.
Square with the British people, how long is this conflict in Ukraine going to last?
Russia needs to know that we're not going away. They can't just outlast us in this conflict, that we will continue to defend Ukraine, because by doing that we're defending the values of freedom, democracy and the rule of law that are very important, rule of law that are very important to us.
Now, talking about NATO, your Defence Secretary wants the top job there. Will you be supporting him?
I think what the Defence Secretary is completely focused on, as am I, is making sure that Ukraine gets the support that it needs.
So you don't want him to apply?
As I said, he's focused right now on supporting Ukraine. He's doing a great job at that, and I know that he would want me to be focused on that message here at the summit, and that's what we're doing.
Your predecessor, Elizabeth Truss, says China is the greatest threat we face. Do you agree?
We view China as an epoch-defining systemic challenge. It's the only country with both the means and the intent to reshape the global order, and its behaviour is increasingly authoritarian at home and assertive abroad. We need to make sure that we take the steps to protect ourselves against that in the UK.
Now, your cabinet colleagues recently attended something called the National Conservatism Conference, which is all about reviving British nationalism. Are you a nationalist?
What I can tell you is that I have enormous pride in our country. And
that's patriotism. Are you a nationalist?
Well, I said everyone will use different labels. I can tell you how I feel about our country. I'm very proud about our country, and particularly over the past week, as I've been seeing lots of foreign leaders, both in my travels but also at the coronation, it's very clear that the respect and affection in which countries around the world hold Britain.
It does sound as though you're slightly uncomfortable with this nationalism idea, which is about national superiority rather than love of country.
Well, again, I think most people just feel very proud to be British. I certainly do.
You've said that you're hopeful that the EU will negotiate on not imposing these electric vehicle tariffs that are coming in early next year. Why is Brexit never done?
I think this is something that has been raised not just by UK automotive companies, but by European car companies as well.
But there's a more fundamental point. The trade deal that we did is unsatisfactory. Why wasn't Brexit done properly?
We've had this debate multiple times. We had a referendum. We've delivered the result of the referendum. We have actually an incredibly deep trade deal with the EU.
You just said yesterday that you think you're going to win the next general election, but on what basis does one of the worst local election results in Tory history put you in a position to say that?
Well, I'm focused on delivering for the country. You know, I'll leave it to other people to talk about elections and all these other things. I'm just focused on delivering for people.
Robert with the Prime Minister in Japan there, and he has just sent us this update from Hiroshima.
Behind me is the tragic reminder of America's 1945 bomb, the last building left standing here in Hiroshima, which gives an added poignancy to the G7 leaders' warning to Vladimir Putin tonight not to deploy nuclear weapons in Ukraine. They're also putting a bigger squeeze on him, making it harder for him to buy the equipment he needs to pursue that war, limiting his sources of finance. But President Zelensky, who's expected here over the weekend, wants more. And in particular, he has big demands of the leaders of India and Brazil, who are also here. And what he wants from them is that they should cease their commercial relations with Russia. They should stop buying Putin's oil. They should come off the fence.
Robert Peston there. Next this lunchtime, West Ham United players were forced to defend their family and friends when violence erupted in the stands last night. The Hammers beat the Dutch team AZ Alkmaar in the Netherlands to reach their first European final in 47 years. But the victory sparked violence. After the final whistle, a group of AZ supporters tried to storm the area reserved to West Ham's relatives, where manager David Moyes' 87-year-old father was sitting. Andrew Misra has the story.
A confrontation that tainted celebrations. West Ham players clashed with AZ Alkmaar fans who'd barged through to the section of the stadium where the Hammers' family and friends had just watched them reach their first major European final in 47 years. The elation of victory.
There's a bit of trouble breaking out, I have to tell you, among some of the rival fans.
Quickly turned to confusion and concern among players and staff. West Ham boss David Moyes worried for his elderly father in the crowd.
I think the biggest problem is it was the area where all the players had their families in, friends and families, and I think that's where the problem came. And a lot of the players were getting angry because they couldn't get to see if they were okay. But look, well, I don't know. We need to wait and ask the officials what really happened.
Moments earlier, Moyes' men had made sure of their place in the Europa Conference League final through a 94th minute winner from Pablo Fornals, securing an aggregate semi-final victory over AZ Alkmaar, whose players condemned the behaviour of some of their supporters after the final whistle.
My girlfriend told me she was shaking. I do not even call them supporters. I think it's very pathetic what they did.
A small group misbehaves. What do I have to say about that? They are a bunch of fools.
The governing body UEFA is investigating what happened. West Ham will hope to turn their attention back to matters on the pitch before the final in Prague in 3 weeks' time. Andrew Misra, ITV News.
Timothy Schofield, the brother of TV presenter Philip Schofield, has been sentenced to 12 years in jail for child abuse offences. He was found guilty last month of 11 sexual offences involving a minor. Well, our reporter Rob Murphy was in court this morning. Rob, what was said?
Yes, Timothy Schofield was a member of police staff. He is the brother of the This Morning host Philip, and today he was here at Bristol Crown Court for the sentencing hearing in which the judge said it was wrong on every level to do what you did. Schofield, who's 54, always denied the 11 counts of sex offences against a minor, but last month the jury convicted him. They were all against one boy, a teenager, between the years of 2016 and 2019. And today a victim impact statement was read out in court on behalf of that boy. He said, before Tim was arrested, I felt I had no freedom. I often felt panic, stress and fear. I felt I was trapped in a loop of fear and anxiety of the abuse happening again and again. And the boy reported Schofield to police in December 2021 to the police force which actually employed him. He was dismissed by Avon and Somerset Police following his conviction last month. Now, the judge sentenced Schofield to 12 years in prison. He'll be put on the sex offenders register for life. He'll be barred from forever working again with children or in law enforcement. And the judge told him today, you took away your victim's ability to be the teenager he should have been. I've not heard a single word of remorse from you, only self-pity.
Rob Murphy in Bristol, thank you. An investigation is underway in Australia after a 95-year-old great-grandmother with dementia was tasered by police. Officers say Claire Nolan was holding a steak knife and walked towards them slowly using her walking frame. It happened at her care home in New South Wales, as Sejal Karia reports.
Claire Nowland, a vulnerable great-grandmother with dementia, should have been treated with compassion. Instead, the 95-year-old was tasered by police. She was struck twice before she fell, suffering a fractured skull, and is now in a critical condition in hospital. The incident unfolding at this care home in the town of Cooma, near the Australian capital, Canberra. As Claire approached officers walking with a frame and holding a knife.
The knife in question is a steak knife, a serrated edge knife. At the time she was tasered, she was approaching police, but it is fair to say at a slow pace. She had a walking frame, but she had a knife.
Claire's been a pillar of her community, appearing on Australian TV in 2008 to mark her 80th birthday by skydiving over Canberra.
Oh, hey!
And dedicating decades of her life serving vulnerable people and volunteering in her local church.
She was 95 with dementia. Treat her as a human being first and treat her as someone with dementia, not a criminal.
The officer who fired the taser's been taken off duty but hasn't been suspended, while an internal investigation has begun.
All our actions will be scrutinised robustly and from a criminal perspective, as well as a departmental perspective. And if it tips into either of those domains, you can be rest assured that if it lands there, then criminal actions will be taken.
This case is opening up a wider debate in Australia about how often police are using tasers and on whom. Family at Claire's bedside say they aren't expecting her to survive. Sejal Karia, ITV News.
The actor Stephen Tomkinson has given his first interview since being found not guilty of GBH. The Brastoff and DCI Bank star was cleared by a jury earlier this month of assaulting a man who was outside his home. Tomkinson told ITV it would have been career suicide to do what he'd been accused of. Sharon Thomas reports.
Can you both just do what I asked you? I haven't got time for anything else.
For more than 3 decades, he's been one of Britain's best-loved actors. Stephen Tomkinson was the star of ITV crime drama DCI Banks, pulling in nearly 6 million viewers, and played a young British priest in Ballykiss Angel, which ran for 5 years in the 90s. He's also had a number of film roles. But real-life drama saw him on trial at Newcastle Crown Court after he was accused of GBH following an altercation outside his home. It took a jury just under an hour to clear him, 2 years after the incident.
Nightmare.
Yes.
Oh, nightmare.
Yes, a little bit. Not so much for me, because I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. These 2 chaps turned up, one just dressed in his underpants and socks, and his friend, who was also very dishevelled, definition of drunk and disorderly. But then they turned a bit nasty and turned on me, and I stopped one of them with my open palm from advancing any further. Because of the state he was in, he took a tumble.
The 57-year-old says the support of his co-star in the play Educating Rita, Jessica Johnson, has been a huge comfort.
If you ever needed an example of strength and a shining light, she has been that throughout.
She has.
And looked after me through this. And I'll never be able to thank her enough.
The man who played a police officer for 6 years told the court during his trial he'd lost acting work since being charged. But he's now looking forward to treading the boards in a new play, which opens next week. Sharon Thomas, ITV News.
The government is set to miss a key target for electric vehicles because it hasn't installed enough rapid charging points on motorways. The sale of new petrol and diesel cars will be banned in the UK from 2030. But drivers say a lack of charging facilities is one of the reasons for not going electric. In March last year, the Department for Transport said they would ensure every motorway service area would have at least 6 rapid chargers by the end of 2023. According to the RAC, that target is set to be missed. Their research shows only 27 out of 119 motorway services in England currently meet that target. Well, Amy Lewis is at Clackett Lane Services for us on the M25. Amy, what's the situation there?
Well, what we're talking about here specifically are rapid charges, which they are chargers actually charge electric vehicles much faster than normal ones. Here at this services, there are 2. They do have plans to install 4 more before the end of the year, so they say they will hit the target, but many, of course, more around the country will miss that target. It is all part of the government's plan to be net zero when it comes to carbon emissions by 2050. As part of that, they want more of us driving electric vehicles. But I've been speaking today to drivers who say that they are simply put off because of the lack of chargers, whether or not it's rapid or not, around the country.
One of the biggest motorways in the country, and how many got here? It's hardly any here at all, is there?
It's okay getting to the charging points. The issue sometimes is they're broken. So you know that there's 2 or 3 charging points and one can be broken.
You have to look at it before you go. Yeah, you have to plan your journey and look where they are and estimate roughly how far you can go on a charge, and then you charge up.
Well, the Department of Transport have told us that at the moment 97% of motorway services have some form of electric chargers, albeit that they are not rapid chargers, and there are plans to install hundreds more before the end of the year. But I was speaking earlier on to the people who run this service station. They say the issue that they have is the fact that a lot of service areas were built decades ago, and it is incredibly challenging getting the power installed to these electric chargers.
Amy Lewis, thank you. When Sir Mo Farah stands at the starting line this weekend, he knows it will be one of his last times he'll run before his retirement. He's in Manchester ahead of that starting gun firing for the Great Manchester Run on Sunday. Rachel Townsend has just been speaking to him. How's he feeling, Rachel?
Well, he's feeling quite emotional, really, ahead of Sunday's race. There is great hype here in Manchester this morning with Sir Mo Farah in town. He is here, of course, as you say, to run the Great Manchester Run, and it will be one of his final races before his retirement in September. And what a well-earned retirement that will be. 4 Olympic golds, including that memorable first in London 2012, as well as 6 World Championships and many more titles. It makes him Britain's most successful track athlete in modern Olympic history. Well, a short time ago, we sat down with him and he shared his feelings ahead of Sunday's race.
Good enjoy, and even for me, this race, the AJ 10K Great Manchester Run, I've taken part, and I know I'm not in the peak of my career, but I enjoy it, and I think it's the last 2 races I'll go out there and take it all in and enjoy it and say goodbye to the street of Manchester on Sunday. Is going to be quite emotional for me, I think.
Well, here's someone who has a remarkable humility about him. We talked about his retirement and what that may involve. He said he imagined getting stuck under his wife's feet because he'll be home a lot more, and he'll become a taxi service for his 4 children. But before he tackles that taxi run, he has got Sunday to think about, and he's right when he says it will be an emotional day. The streets beneath us here in Manchester will be packed out with thousands of people who've come out to say goodbye and thank you to Sir Mo.
Rachel in Manchester, thank you. The counting of votes has started in Northern Ireland's council elections. Voters went to the polls yesterday to decide who would represent them across 11 councils. The final results are not expected to be confirmed until tomorrow. And Adele, Harry Styles and Ed Sheeran are among the UK's richest under 35s. They're all worth more than £150 million, according to the Sunday Times Rich List. But they are not quite wealthy enough to make the main Rich List, where people must have at least £350 million. And finally, the indie band The Smiths defined the Manchester music scene in the 1980s. That unforgettable sound was helped made possible by the bassist Andy Rourke. His childhood friend and bandmate Johnny Marr broke the news this morning that Andy had died from pancreatic cancer at just 59. Our entertainment reporter Rishi Davda looks back on the life of a musician described as supremely gifted with a kind, beautiful soul.
Though a bass player may not stand front and centre, their impact on a band's sound cannot be underestimated. With guitar in hand, Andy Rourke cemented his place in musical history. He started playing at just 7, befriending Johnny Marr at 11. Johnny and Andy, along with Morrissey and Mike Joyce, made up the Smiths, a Manchester band which would go on to have 2 #1 albums. It was Johnny Marr who announced Andy's death. Paying tribute, he said, "Watching him play those dazzling bass lines was an absolute privilege and genuinely something to behold. But one time which always comes to mind was when I sat next to him at the mixing desk, watching him play his bass on the song The Queen is Dead. It was so impressive that I said to myself, I'll never forget this moment." He not only impressed those around him, but inspired a generation of bass players.
He was the man who made it all happen to me. He was a really great, fun, genuine bloke, and I had a lot of respect for him, and one of the sort of greatest bass players that come out of Manchester in the post-punk area in the 80s.
Andy's remembered for not only his countless melodic bass lines, but also his beautiful soul.
Andy Rourke, who's died at the age of 59. Well, that is it from us this lunchtime. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye-bye.